T9C, got the fucking juice.
Silver's the new gold.
Chris is shit sick.
T9C, got the fucking juice.
Silver's the new gold.
Chris is shit sick.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of JT Sports Live. I'm your host, JT. Wanted to give off a couple of takes, some reactions to some of the earlier slate of games during week one of this NFL season, man. And things have already gotten out to a very chaotic start. And I want to try to get as many reactions out as possible before the Sunday night game between the Rams and the Lions kickoff. I mean, there was a lot going on Sunday afternoon today, man. You had the Saints annihilating the Panthers. Yeah, I definitely was wrong about this one. The Pittsburgh Steelers snuck past the Atlanta Falcons despite Russell Wilson not playing. Caleb Williams and the Chicago Bears pulled out a tough one against the Tennessee Titans. The Chargers took down the Raiders. There was a lot going on this afternoon that we got to get into. Shout out to everybody that's tuned in wherever you're watching, YouTube, X. Do us a favor. Smash that like button, follow, subscribe, turn on post notifications so you don't miss when we upload new content and when we go live. Remember, we are not just a YouTube channel, we are a podcast. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from. The JT Sports Podcast is available. Shout out to my guy M Sparks in the comment section. He says Pittsburgh Steelers for life. Shout out to my guy Sideline Scoop. Shout out to everybody that's tuned in, man. And let's just go ahead, get straight into it. We're just going to go ahead, skip over the ads. Man, what a way to start the new Dave Canales era. Or I don't even think I want to go with that. But Dave Canales made his official debut as the Carolina Panthers' new head coach. And things went about as bad as what you thought they could have went. They lost 47-10 to the Saints. And the Panthers, they look worse in this game than what they did last year. And that's saying something. The defense can't stop the run or the pass. Derek Carr had 3 touchdowns. The Saints had 199 yards on the ground. And the Panthers' offense still looks as broken as what it did last year. I've been saying so many good things about Bryce Young this offseason. I was saying how he was going to flourish under this new offense with Dave Canales, how too many people were blaming him for how bad his rookie campaign was when Carolina had a terrible supporting cast. So there are no more excuses for Bryce Young to play the way that he did today against New Orleans. Was unacceptable. You got Deontay Johnson, you got Xavier Legette, you got all these new weapons, but yet anytime somebody was open in the middle of the field, Bryce Young was overthrowing them. And I love Bryce Young. I want him to succeed, but this was a really awful performance that we've seen out of him. And right now, he's looking like one of the biggest busts in NFL history. What happened to the Bryce Young that we all saw at Alabama? Because he carried those Bama teams. Nick Saban, once he left, said that we were too Bryce Young dependent, and he cleaned house with his whole entire coaching staff. And let's not make it seem like Bryce Young was carried by the talent he had around him at Alabama. The only first-round picks he played with was Jahmyr Gibbs and Jamison Williams. That was it. So you were expecting a lot out of Bryce Young when Carolina traded up the farm to get him despite his lack of size. Everything that made Bryce Young great as a prospect coming out of Alabama, we haven't seen yet as the quarterback for the Carolina Panthers. And it is week 1. There still is a lot of time for Bryce Young to get better, for him to click in Dave Canales' offense. But a 47-10 beatdown to New Orleans is definitely something that you didn't want to see if you were a Panthers fan. And nobody really gave the Panthers a shot to win this game. Most people expected New Orleans to win, but if you thought New Orleans was just going to make Carolina look like they were an FCS team, and you would have thought that this was a FCS versus FBS matchup like what we be seeing in college football when they play these random trash schools and they get blown out by the Alabamas and Georgias of the world. That's how bad Carolina looked this afternoon. Dennis Allen's defense just confused Bryce Young. He had no answers for anything that Dennis Allen was throwing at him. I mean, when he was running around and he was able to get outside the pocket, he showed that he looked more athletic than what he did last year. I was really impressed with how agile he looked with the ball in his hands. Maybe they need to run him a lot more. Even though he is small, he is a lot better of a runner than what you would think. He's not Kyler Murray fast, but he is shifty. Maybe get some RPOs going, get some design quarterback runs or some zone reads going with Bryce Young. But you got to do something to get this brother playing at a serviceable level, because he has a new coaching staff, a new supporting cast, and he still looks bad. I'm not writing him off after this week 1 performance, but I definitely am more skeptical than I am optimistic when it comes to Bryce Young, man. Maybe the Carolina Panthers did make a truly awful decision drafting him over CJ Stroud. Hopefully he can turn it around next week. Next up, the Pittsburgh Steelers got a tough win, 18-10 against the Atlanta Falcons, and the Steelers defense carried like they always did. TJ Watt single-handedly won this game for Pittsburgh, in my opinion. The Atlanta Falcons could not stop this dude, man. He was in the backfield nearly every play, it seemed like, either getting the sack or causing chaos behind the line of scrimmage. The Steelers defense came away with 3 takeaways in this game. They had 2 interceptions on Kirk Cousins and the fumble recovery. They held the Falcons to under 100 rushing yards. And Chris Boswell is still the MVP of the Steelers offense. He's the Steelers' best offensive player. He scored all 18 of their points in this game. You know, the Steelers offensively look a little bit better this year with Arthur Smith calling the plays. Because at least you're not going 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out every possession. Instead, you're kicking field goals every possession. And I guess you can't be too mad at that because you are putting points on the board. But you would like to see the Steelers do a better job at finishing drives. Justin Fields got the start at quarterback today. Russell Wilson was sidelined with the calf injury. And I thought he played pretty well. You know, he did have a couple of throws that got away from him when he had guys wide open, 6-8 yards down the field. He put it in the turf. But I liked how Arthur Smith did a really good job of utilizing Justin Fields' dynamic running ability. He was cooking up design quarterback runs, read options, and that's what you want to see Arthur Smith do with the guy that has the skill set Justin Fields has. The Steelers don't need for Justin Fields to be the second coming of Big Ben. And he looked better than Kenny Pickett. He was averaging 9.2 yards per completion. Kenny Pickett last year barely wanted to throw the football past 5 yards downfield. So I will take the performance that Justin Fields gave Pittsburgh this afternoon over anything that KP or Mason Rudolph or Mitch Trubisky did last year. And I want to see if the Steelers are going to stick with Justin Fields as QB1 because he brings more to this offense than what you would get if you go with Russell Wilson. If you start Russell Wilson, you're not going to get the effective quarterback runs out of him that you were getting out of Justin Fields. He's just a different kind of athlete than what Russell Wilson is. And to be honest with you, I believe right now, at this point of his career, Russell Wilson isn't even a better QB than what Justin Fields is. Justin Fields had a pretty good game. You know, he did have a couple of botched snaps, but he didn't turn it over. He was able to get on top of them. So the Steelers played a pretty okay game offensively. I'm not going to say good because anytime you score under 20 in today's NFL, it's a lackluster performance. But at least you were able to put some points up on the board. You slowed down Atlanta's offense. If you're a Falcons fan, man, Kirk Cousins looked really rusty today. You obviously could tell that he didn't play a lot in the preseason. He didn't play at all. He still is trying to get back to the form that he was prior to sustaining that Achilles injury. But your next 2 games are really tough. This was a game that Atlanta had to win against Pittsburgh, and they walk away with the L. Now you got to play Philadelphia and the Kansas City Chiefs these next 2 weeks. And if you start out 0-3 and Kirk Cousins still struggles in those games like he did today against Pittsburgh, then you have to start asking, do we go to Michael Penix? You did invest the top 10 pick into him. He did look lights out the only preseason game that he played against Miami. And for all the money that you're investing in the Kirk Cousins, you don't have any room, if you're Raheem Morris, to have a season where you go under 500. This should at least be a 9-win team or better, and they got to make it to the playoffs, it seems like. With all the talent that Atlanta has, bringing in Matt Judon, Justin Simmons, the good offensive line, Kyle Pitts, Drake London, B. John Robinson on offense, it seems like it has to be playoffs or bust, for the Atlanta Falcons this year. And if they don't make it to the postseason, I think that's a fair reason to fire Raheem Morris. And losing a game like this to Pittsburgh, is definitely concerning, because this was a game that they were favored to win. They were like a 2-3 point favorite coming into this game, and they just really couldn't get anything going offensively due to how rusty Kirk Cousins looked. The best play Kirk had was when he threw that touchdown to Kyle Pitts. I know that had Falcons fans going crazy, because they were like, oh, damn, we got an offensive coordinator that actually knows how to get Kyle Pitts the freaking football. Well, this was Arthur Smith's revenge game. I thought he coached a pretty good game. He has some pretty nice play calls in there. We did see a little bit more variance out of this offense compared to the same old jet sweep every damn play with Matt Canada. So I like what I saw out of the Steelers offensively tonight against Atlanta. Obviously, you want to see more points put on the scoreboard than just 18, and you don't want your kicker responsible for all the points that you scored. But a win is a win. It's week one. Oftentimes, you're going to get sloppy play. Things aren't going to look as good now as what they will look in the middle of the season, when everybody's in the thick of the NFL action, everybody's acclimated to the playbook, everybody has a better understanding of the play caller's tendencies, what their offensive coordinator wants to do. So the Steelers get a really impressive win, 18-10 over the Atlanta Falcons. Caleb Williams made his NFL debut. He walks away with a win. 24-10 was the final score in Bears versus Titans. And for the Chicago Bears, this game was as ugly as what it could look for you all season long offensively. Caleb Williams had a rough debut. He couldn't get anything going. His receivers were dropping passes. This just was a very ugly performance out of Chicago offensively, but thankfully their defense was able to carry the load and get them the W. Will Levis had 2 costly turnovers in the fourth quarter. He had a really weird fumble. I don't know what he was trying to do. I don't know if he was just trying to throw the ball to a receiver he thought was open, or if he was trying to throw the ball away, but whatever he was trying to do, the fumble led to the Chicago Bears getting the field goal. They were only down by 1 point at that moment. It was 17-16. The Titans were still up. And then eventually, Will Levis throws a pick six, and it gives the Chicago Bears an eventual 24-17 lead. And they eventually win the game because of it. And the Bears' offensive line still struggled a lot in this game. The Titans' front seven was getting a good amount of pressure on Caleb Williams. He didn't really have that much time to throw. And, if it wasn't for the Bears playing the way that they did in the fourth quarter, they definitely would have lost this game. Caleb Williams definitely looks like a work in progress. He didn't look as good as what you were expecting him to for somebody that's the first overall pick who's supposed to be the next Patrick Mahomes. But I expect him to improve. I think as we progress throughout the next couple of weeks, you're going to start seeing this passing attack get better within the next month or so, because Caleb Williams, with him being so new to the NFL game, and these defensive coordinators are playing him so differently than what they were in college. In college, he was going up against defenses that were only sending 3-4 guys at him. Now you got defensive coordinators that are bringing 6-7 guys to get after you. It definitely is going to take some adjusting for Caleb Williams to start getting accustomed to the speed of the NFL game. There are times when he just looked like a deer in headlights out there, like a good amount of the other rookie quarterbacks that we saw in week one. Tennessee was really good on the ground. Tony Pollard had a really good afternoon, and you would have loved for Tennessee to lean on that ground game a little bit more. It seemed like they were trying to make Will Levis prove himself in this game, and he failed miserably. And outside of that one touchdown that he threw to Okonkwo, he wasn't good. And I really don't see the hype that Titans fans have for Will Levis this offseason. You know, the dude still is not that accurate. The decision-making still is really wonky, as we saw today with the several turnovers that he had. There was a lot to be concerned about when it comes to Will Levis and the future of the quarterback position for Tennessee. And after watching them lose to Chicago today, I very much could see this team picking another quarterback in next year's draft. This was a really ugly performance out of Will Levis today. He did some nice things. It wasn't all bad, but I just don't see it with Will Levis. You know, I just don't think that he has it up here, and he doesn't have the accuracy and the short intermediate passing game to be effective. It's like the dude is missing layups. When you can't even make the cheap shots, you know, then you don't deserve to be a starting quarterback in today's league. So the Chicago Bears walk away with a 24-10 win or 24-17 win over the Tennessee Titans. The Dallas Cowboys absolutely crushed the Cleveland Browns. 33-17 was the final score. My biggest takeaway watching this game is that Deshaun Watson is fucking garbage. Okay, you got to move on from this dude. Eventually, you got to say enough is enough. We're not about to continue to get scammed for $220 million guaranteed, keep putting out this atrocity at quarterback on the field, and keep losing games because of him. I thought Kevin Stefanski in the third quarter after halftime should have threw out Jameis Winston. Truthfully, Jameis Winston can't be no worse than what Deshaun Watson is right now. I mean, this dude is absolutely broken. We are never going to get the version of Deshaun Watson that we saw in Houston. The Cleveland Browns just need to go ahead, wave the white flag with him. You probably can't cut him because his cap hit is way too big, but you can't keep starting this dude with how bad he is, with his accuracy. He's just throwing the ball in the dirt when guys are wide open, or he's selling it 10 feet above their helmets. He had some nice plays when he was scrambling out of pressure. He was trying to buy time for guys to get open, but even then, when he's on the run, his accuracy, throwing the guys on the move, isn't good anymore. I mean, everything that made Deshaun Watson an elite quarterback with the Houston Texans, he doesn't have the ability to do those things anymore. Maybe him not playing that one season just completely made him forget how to be a good quarterback anymore. But the Browns have done everything they can to try to squeeze all the juice out of this dude. They revamped their coaching staff. They got a new OC. You know, you give him more weapons to throw the ball to. You got Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore, but it ain't even no point in having all these decent receivers if Deshaun Watson is throwing the ball in the dirt to him. Amari Cooper barely got any action in this game. And the ground game was non-existent for Cleveland as well. Their offensive line played as bad as what they've had. And over the last 2 years, they lost their offensive line coach, Bill Callahan, to the Tennessee Titans. And you definitely can see the impact of that loss, because this offensive line was just getting train wrecked by the Dallas Cowboys up front. Now, Mike Zimmer was throwing a lot of exotic blitzes out there, but you just expect more out of an offensive line that played so well last year, having so many injuries. This just was an awful performance out of the Cleveland Browns and Deshaun Watson. And if Jameis Winston would have played, the game wouldn't have been as one-sided as what the final score shows. I mean, Deshaun Watson was as bad as what it looks like in the box score, man. 24-45. He only threw one touchdown when he engineered one good drive. I believe he threw a touchdown to Jerry Jeudy, but the 2 interceptions he threw, one was a tip pass that got caught by Trayvon Diggs. Welcome back. But, I mean, Deshaun Watson at this point, this dude is just completely broken. The Cleveland Browns are trying to find the software patch for him. They're trying to find the update for him. But this is just the new Deshaun Watson. If you're a Browns fan, you got to accept the truth that Deshaun Watson is never going to revert back to the form that he was in Houston. And the new version of him is one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL. I don't know who's worse, Deshaun Watson or Daniel Jones. They look pretty damn bad to me. Jim Harbaugh, in his return to the NFL, got the win. The Chargers take down the Raiders 22-17. At one point, this was a defensive slugfest. Both defenses were going to town on each other. Christian Wilkins and Max Crosby, oh my goodness. If your favorite team has to go up against this duo, you're in a lot of trouble if your offensive line sucks, man, because in the first half against the Chargers, Max Crosby, Christian Wilkins, they couldn't be blocked, man. It's like, what can you do when you're going up against a defensive tackle that is dominant when it comes to getting after your quarterback and is dominant against the run? You can't avoid running his side because he's right smack dab in the middle of your defense. No matter what, he's going to cause a problem. And then when you want to try to game plan to run away from Christian Wilkins, you got to worry about Max Crosby. These are two of the NFL's top 10 players on defense. And they make the Raiders defense a legitimate elite unit. Their secondary's pretty good. You know, the Raiders defense came to play in this game. And I don't even think that the Raiders offensively were too bad neither. Gardner Minshew, I felt he played pretty well in this game. Now, he did have the typical Gardner Minshew weird turnovers. He had one fumble where a guy didn't even come off the edge and knock it out of his hands. Like, he was just bobbling the football. He lost control of it, and the Chargers scooped it up, and you was like, okay, there you go. There's the Gardner Minshew experience for you. But, you know, outside of that mistake, I felt Gardner Minshew played winning football. What lost the Raiders this game was the Zamir White fumble. You also had a key missed field goal in the second half. And once you missed that field goal, that's when the Chargers started to take control of this game. J.K. Dobbins, you know, this dude is a stud when he's healthy. The problem is he's unable to stay on the field. But today, he was going off. He had 10 carries, 135 rushing yards. He was averaging 13.5 yards per attempt. He has like over 22 fantasy points for me right now on my fantasy football team. He carried the Chargers offense in the second half. Justin Herbert, he looks rusty. He threw a pick after the Chargers got a big fumble. He overthrew two wide open wide receivers for touchdowns. You know, Justin Herbert looked really shaky in this game. And I'm wondering how much of Herbert's struggles in this game against the Raiders were due to him having to learn a new scheme under Greg Roman. Because the thing with Greg Roman is that he has really good schemes when it comes to the run game. You know, when Greg Roman's calling your plays offensively, you're guaranteed to have an elite rushing attack. But his offense kind of holds back the quarterback because it's tight end heavy. You don't have a lot of receivers on the field. And you know, for Justin Herbert, man, he just didn't look like himself out there. He definitely looked a little rusty. Hopefully he ends up improving over the next couple of weeks. He did miss a good stretch of training camp due to an injury that he sustained. So maybe that's why he looked so sluggish out there. But this was a pretty entertaining game, surprisingly. But when the Chargers started to roll in the fourth quarter, you already kind of knew that the game was pretty much over. The Raiders did fight back and make it a one-possession game when you look at the final score, 22-17. But really, the Chargers were the more dominant team in the second half. The Raiders' defense got worn down. And that's really when the Chargers started to play the brand of football that Jim Harbaugh wants to. Smash mouth football. We're going to run the football down your throat. We're going to prove that we're stronger than you. We're more physical than you on the line of scrimmage. And that's what happened in the second half of this game. But really, I believe the Raiders had the opportunity to win this thing. But when you have 3 turnovers and a missed field goal going up against a team like the Chargers, eventually they're going to make you pay for those mistakes. And that ultimately is the reason why the Raiders lost. They couldn't take care of the football. Gardner Minshew played pretty well. You can't really put this loss on him. For the most part, I felt he was pretty good. But shout out to Jim Harbaugh getting his first win as the new head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers. And I believe next week they're going to be playing the Carolina Panthers. So it looks like they're going to end up starting out 2-0. Got to pick up my mouse. Let's move on. Another game I want to talk about. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers took down the Washington Commanders. 37-20 was the final score. Dan Quinn is a defensive-minded coach. And when he was hired by Washington, I thought that this defense was going to be improved. But this defense looks as bad as what it did under Ron Rivera, man. At one point in this game, they had Baker Mayfield looking like Tom Brady 2.0. And I'm not making this up. Like, at one point during this game, Baker Mayfield couldn't throw an incompletion to save his life. He had 12 straight completions at one point. I mean, he was absolutely cooking Dan Quinn's defense. 24-30, 289 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. This was a flawless performance out of Baker Mayfield. The Buccaneers also had success on the ground. It looks like they got a pretty good 1-2 punch with Rashad White and Bucky Irvin, who I loved a lot coming out of Oregon. He's not the fastest, most explosive guy, but he's pretty shifty and has incredible vision. And the only positive that I can say about the Washington Commanders from this game is that Jayden Daniels looked pretty good. He looked better than all of the other rookie quarterbacks that we saw this afternoon. He looked pretty calm, had his composure, and when Todd Bowles was sending pressure at him, you know, I thought he handled it pretty well. But the offensive line, on the other hand, oh my goodness, if you don't do something with this offensive line, you're going to end up running Jayden Daniels probably 200 plus this season, man. You got to get this brother some protection because he ain't getting no help from the big fellas up front in this game. He was running for his life all afternoon. And the only way the Commanders were really able to move the ball downfield was when they were running the football with Jayden Daniels and Brian Thomas, or not Brian Thomas, but Brian Robinson had a pretty good game as well. Those were the only 2 playmakers the Commanders had. You know, you need to add some more weapons in the passing game for Jayden Daniels to throw the football to, because the key is, and Luke McCaffrey, Terry McLaurin, they obviously aren't enough. And, you know, this is just a really disappointing game if you are a fan that roots for the Commanders, because, you know, with Dan Quinn being a defensive-minded coach and how good his defenses were the last couple of years as the DC for the Cowboys, you don't expect for Tampa Bay with a new offensive coordinator and Baker Mayfield learning a new system that just looked completely flawless in this game. There were a lot of quarterbacks this afternoon that were struggling. But Baker Mayfield and company, man, it looks like they picked up from where they left off last year. The offense looks more efficient. You know, they were operating like a well-oiled machine. And the last thing for Washington that I got to nag about is, why the hell do you continue to throw out Emmanuel Forbes? This dude is not good. He had 2 penalties on 1 play, a pass interference call, and a damn face mask penalty, man. How much do you got to see out of Emmanuel Forbes to know that this dude sucks at football? Maybe he doesn't suck at football, but he definitely sucks at corner. Just move this dude to safety. Stop wasting your time throwing Emmanuel Forbes out there, because the only thing that happens when Emmanuel Forbes is on the field is that your defense gives up easy touchdowns because offenses are running whoever offense on him. If you are an opposing quarterback and you see Emmanuel Forbes enter the game, you automatically have to target his side, man, because something good is always going to happen for you when you throw out Emmanuel Forbes, because this dude is flat out garbage. For the life of me, I don't understand what the hell the Commanders were thinking when they drafted Emmanuel Forbes over Christian Gonzalez, man. That was one of the stupidest decisions that I've ever seen a team make in recent memory in the NFL draft. It was pretty obvious that Christian Gonzalez should have been the pick. What are you doing drafting this damn 2 pick in the first round at corner? I mean, come on, man. This was a pathetic performance that we saw out of the Commanders defensively today. I mean, the Bucs could not get stopped at all offensively. They only had about 1 or 2 drives when they didn't score in this game. They were lining up the scoreboard all afternoon in Raymond James Stadium. I mean, this was embarrassing, just completely embarrassing. Before we move on, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new. Remember to turn on post notifications so you don't miss when we drop new content. Give us a 5-star review if you enjoy. You can find the JT Sports Podcast on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from. The JT Sports Podcast is available. The game's about to start. I got 2 more topics I want to hit on before I get up on out of here. The Seattle Seahawks took down the Denver Broncos 26-20 was the final score. Mike McDaniel, or I said Mike McDaniel. Start that over. The Seahawks take down the Broncos 26-20 was the final score. Mike McDaniel gets his first win as a head coach in the NFL. And things started out really rocky for Seattle. In the first half of this game, this offensive line couldn't block a soul. They were as bad as what Colorado's offensive line was last night against Nebraska. They gave up a safety. Geno Smith had an interception. And I was just like, oh, God. Like, this is how Seattle's about to look offensively this year? I hope not. But, in the second half, they started to get the momentum on their side. Their offense started to get in rhythm as we progressed throughout the game. And once we got into the third, fourth quarter, that's when Seattle's offense really started to hum. Kenneth Walker had some really nice runs. He had a touchdown in this game. Zach Charbonnet also had a few nice runs as well. The offensive line for Seattle steadily started to improve throughout this game. They lost a guy to an injury early at offensive tackle. And this game was kind of a tale of 2 halves for Seattle. In the first half, you were losing the turnover battle. Then in the second half, you won the turnover battle. And the Denver Broncos, what ultimately lost them this game was their inability to capitalize early off Seattle's miscues, because Seattle's defense was out of this world this afternoon. I mean, for all of the miscues they had offensively, their defense was able to bail them out because they only gave up field goals off those mistakes. And Bo Nix, he looked rattled out there. He looked like a deer in headlights. He didn't look composed. He looked a little bit jumpy back there in the pocket. And I thought Bo Nix was going to look a lot better than what he did with Sean Payton being his head coach. And we know that Sean Payton is one of the better offensive minds that the NFL has seen over the last couple of decades. But, there definitely is a lot of work to be done with Bo Nix. He still is a work in progress, but I'm not too concerned about him, only because he went up against one of the best defenses that he's going to see all year. Mike McDaniel has a very complex defense. He throws a lot at you, a lot of different alignments, a lot of different fronts, and it was a tall task asking Bo Nix to have a good performance in his NFL debut, going up against a defense as complicated as what McDaniel's is. So I'm not too surprised that he struggled, but at the same time, I did thought that he would have looked a little bit better. I thought Sean Payton would have had a little bit of a better game plan, because that Mike McDaniel is one of the better defensive minds in the league. I mean, they're comparing this dude to be the defensive version of what Sean McVay is. So, I mean, if you're Sean Payton, you should have had a little bit of a better game plan to help ease Bo Nix into this game. I felt like the Denver Broncos put way too much on Bo Nix's plate against a stout defense in the Seattle Seahawks, and he struggled. He had 2 interceptions. He did have a touchdown, but, that was on the ground. It's just, you don't want your rookie quarterback in their first ever game against a defense as good as what Mike McDaniel's is to be throwing the football 42 times. That is a recipe for failure if you're asking your rookie QB to throw the ball as much as what Sean Payton did this afternoon. And, Bo Nix, he will get better. He did have some moments where he flashed his ability to make things happen when the play was breaking down, but you had a key amount of drops from his receivers as well. His supporting cast isn't that good. They got some really good running backs. You got Courtland Sutton, but outside of that, Bo Nix isn't really working with too much down there in Denver. So we're going to see how things continue to progress when it comes to Bo Nix development. But this was a huge win for the Seattle Seahawks. Anytime you can get your first career win as a head coach is always a huge milestone, and Seattle starts this season off right. You know, you had a sloppy first half, but you played your best football in the second half when it mattered the most. Denver almost came back and made this a game, but, you know, I was never once concerned about Seattle's ability to hold on to the win once they started to take control of this game, because Bo Nix couldn't do anything against the kind of fronts and looks that he was seeing Mike McDonald throw at him. Shout out to everybody in the comment section. My guy Conebridge says Bryce looked so bad today. Canales in the defense did as well. The Panthers look like a random bunch of 53. Yeah, man, the Panthers were really bad. Daniels going to get himself hurt. Listen, I like what I saw out of Jayden Daniels, man. I felt like he was the best rookie quarterback of the bunch. And that's the last thing I want to talk about before I get up on out of here. So I want to give my thoughts on the rookie QBs who made their official NFL debuts week 1. Caleb Williams, Jayden Daniels, and Bo Nix all played. Caleb Williams didn't look that good. Jayden Daniels, I felt he was the better of the 3 quarterbacks that started on Sunday. I mean, yeah, he didn't have that great of a stat line. He wasn't that good at throwing the football, but he was more efficient throwing the football than what Caleb Williams and Bo Nix were. He had 184 passing yards, completed 17 out of 24 of his passes, and the only time the Commanders were moving the football efficiently was when they were running it with Jayden Daniels. This dude is just too dynamic of a runner where if you're a defense, even if he is a rookie, where you allow him to get a lot of green grass because he's going to make you pay. And I felt like Todd Bowles kind of had a defensive strategy where he was like, you know, even though I heard about Jayden Daniels' running ability, he's going to have to show me. And Jayden Daniels definitely did show Todd Bowles in a major way. He was torching Tampa Bay all afternoon on the ground. 88 total rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns as well. Jayden Daniels was as good as advertised, and I felt he was better than what Caleb Williams and Bo Nix were in week 1. Now, the team that he played, I don't think is as good as what team Bo Nix went up against. I feel like Seattle is going to be a better team than Tampa Bay this year, but definitely was really impressive what we saw out of Jayden Daniels. Bo Nix, he had some moments where he flashed the potential where he could be a really athletic version of Drew Brees, but this afternoon he didn't really have too much to be excited about due to how good Mike McDonald's defense is. It's just, I can't stress this enough. When you're going up against a defense like Seattle's, where you got a guy like Mike McDonald that's throwing so many different fronts and alignments at you, it's hard to prepare for that as a rookie because you've never seen this before, because this is your first NFL game. And plus, the speed of the game is just so fast. Everything's going a million miles per hour. And when you got a defense this advanced, this tactical, yeah, it's hard to envision you having that much success. You know, 2 interceptions. He did have 1 rushing touchdown, 1 good drive, but it was tough sledding for Bo Nix this afternoon against Seattle. And Caleb Williams, I mean, this was a very disappointing outing out of him. I don't care if it's his first game ever. When you get this much hype, you're compared to Patrick Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers. You can't go 14 or 29 for 93 yards, man. That's terrible. And he's the only first overall pick in the last couple of decades that's won their debut game. But really, the defense won his debut game because they stole the show for the Bears. And it wasn't all Caleb Williams' fault for why Chicago's offense was struggling today. His receivers had a couple of drops. Keenan Allen, of all people, had a drop, and he has one of the best hands in the NFL, or some of the best hands in the NFL. It just was an all-around bad performance out of Chicago offensively. The offensive line still looked as bad as what it did last year. You know, you couldn't get much going on the ground game with DeAndre Swift. you can't put it all on Caleb Williams, but I definitely did expect more out of him. I didn't expect him to struggle the way that he did against the Tennessee Titans. But this is it for this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. I hope that you guys enjoy the Sunday night game between the Lions and the Rams. And I will see you guys tomorrow with another episode of JT Sports Live.